Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. So the title of the conference is, I think, Limit Theorems for Dynamical Systems, and I'm afraid my talk will not be right on the topic of the conference because I will not be talking about limit theorems. Limit theorems means you're looking at some asymptotic properties, say, of a dynamical system, and I will rather be interested in what happens at finite fixed time. To take an analogy, if you have an election and you want to know in advance the result of the election, you organize a poll, and you know that the law of large number tells you that if the size of your sample is large enough, then you will predict the result of the election with a good accuracy. But if you only know that it's for large enough n, this is not enough for practical purposes. And what you really want to know is if you have some sample of a given size, what precision can you get on the result with a good probability, say 95%, or well, organizing, having a large sample is expensive. So you want to, if you know the precision you want to be able to take your sample as small as possible. And here I will be asking the same question, but for a dynamical system. So say you are given some dynamical system and you have a question you want to ask to this system. So you can simulate your system, and then you want an answer to your question with a good precision and with high probability. And you're asking, how long should I iterate my system to have that kind of estimate? So what you need is some kind of deviation inequality that tells you that some function, depending on the question you're asking, some function does not deviate too much from its average, and you want to know this at fixed n. And in a perfect world, you would even be able to control the constants, but that I won't be talking about. So you want some kind of precise deviation inequalities, or rather, what you want to prove is that a function does not deviate too much from its average. So instead of deviation inequalities, these kind of inequalities are called concentration inequalities, meaning that you want to prove that a function is almost constant. It's with very high probability, very close to its average. And that's the kind of inequality that I will be interested in. They are very well known in probability theory and maybe a little less well known in dynamical systems. So let me explain you a little bit more what this is. Let me first start with the IID case where everything is easier. So I will start with concentration inequalities for IID. So say you are given x1, x2, and so on. They are independent, identically distributed. And, well, when you start probability theory, the first thing you want to look at is their sum, and is it close to its average? So first quantity you're looking at is sum from 1 to n of the xi's. And then probabilities start developing, and you realize that this is interesting, but it's not the only object upon which you want to ask questions. For instance, maybe you're interested in, well, maybe you scale, no, okay, keep it like that. Maybe you want to ask question about U statistics. Or maybe you want to do some non-conventional averaging. Maybe you will. Maybe you want to ask questions about things like sum of xi, x2i. Or, well, all these still have some nice algebraic structure, so you hope that case by case you will be able to understand the structure of these things to get precise answer to your question. And maybe later on you have a little bit more complicated expression, like the maximum of the SIs. And then you go on and you realize that it would be interesting to have an inequality that tell that all these things do not deviate too much from their average. And even for more complicated functions, if you could have that kind of statement, that would be great. And that's precisely what the concentration inequality tells you. So let me just introduce some definition. I will take a function k of n variables. And I will say that it is separately bounded if just changing one of the xi's does not have a big influence on the value of the function. So you look at k of x1, xn, and then you look at the same, but you just change one of the xi. So say you change xi, so x1, x2, xi minus 1, and then I change xi to some xi prime, xi plus 1, xn. And you want this to be bounded, say, by 1. And then the concentration inequalities, one version, there are several kinds of concentration inequality, but the one which is maybe the most basic and the most useful of them is the following. So you look at these IID random variables and you take k, which is a function of n variables, which is separately bounded in this sense. And then you look at the probability that your function k applied to your random variables x1 to xn, you subtract its average. Can this be large? Can this be larger than some quantity t? And this is smaller than some exponential of minus, well, if you want to get it right, you have a 2 minus t squared over, well, say, 10n. Okay? And maybe for sure the 10 is not the best constant here. The point is in the form of the inequality. You should see that here I have two constants here, 2 and 10. They do not depend on anything. They do not depend on your function k. They do not depend on the IID sequence of random variables you're looking at. They do not depend on n. It's a completely universal inequality. And let's see a little bit what this gives to see if it's a good inequality. So, for instance, assume that your xi's are bounded. Say bounded by 1. And look at the function k of x1, xn, which is x1 plus xn. Okay? This function is separately bounded because if you just replace xi by x prime I, the difference is at most 1. It's okay, say it's bounded by 1/2, and I'm looking at this function on minus 1/2 to the n. Then if you change one of your variables, then you change your function k by at most 1. So it means that changing one of the variables does not have a big influence on the final value of the function k. And then, is there something wrong? No, it's okay. And then what your deviation inequality above tells you, say that they are centered to simplify. Then your deviation inequality tells you that the probability that Sn is larger than t, it's smaller than what? Exponential minus t squared over n. let me forget about the constants. So you know that the right scale for Sn is a square root of n, because Sn divided by square root of n tends to a Gaussian. So you get that the probability of that Sn divided by square root of n is larger than t. Well, it cancels with the n. You get something smaller than exponential minus t squared. So what this tells you is that Sn divided by square root of n is uniformly for all n smaller than a Gaussian, for all n and for all those xi's. And so, for instance, this gives you readily a control on all the moments of this quantity. So this is a strong bound. Another question we like to ask about that kind of sum is a large deviation. How likely is it to be larger than a multiple of n? If you're asking the question, what is the probability that Sn is larger than epsilon n? Well, just take your deviation inequality with t equal to epsilon n. And here you will have an n squared. So it's smaller than exponential of minus epsilon squared times n. So it tells you that large deviation events are exponentially unlikely, just as you expect. So you see, this inequality above, it already contains a lot of what we know about sums of independent random variables. Well, not a lot, but already significant information. And the point in that, you can apply it to any of your functions that I wrote on the left. They are all separately bounded in that kind of setting. So you get the same kind of deviation inequalities for your U statistics or your non-conventional averages or your maxima or whatever. In fact, independent is enough. The identical distribution is not important. If you have independent and bounded by 1/2, it's okay. No, independent. And then there are a lot of variation around this inequality above. I suppose that the dependence on all the xi's was the same. The difference, if you change xi to x prime I, it was bounded by 1. More generally, you can assume that if your function k is a little bit more complicated, it does not depend in the same way on all your variables. You can assume that k of xi minus k of x prime I is bounded not just by 1 uniformly, but by some constant that depends on I. Assume that this. So it's still separately bounded, but the constants depend on the index you're looking at. So if you have this, then you have the same kind of inequality, the probability that k minus expectation of k is. I'm not writing the variables anymore because it's too long to write, but the same inequality as above. And then you will get the same kind of statement, but instead of this n is the sum of ones squared, you will get the sum of the li's squared. And the proof is in fact the same. And you can also ask a question, what happens if you don't have a boundedness for this, but say some kind of tails, some decay? It's well known that if you have some tails, well, you're not expecting a strong exponential or Gaussian inequality like that, but you would be expecting some inequalities for the variance or for things like that. And you can do this. There are a lot of variations around this theme. Depending on your precise assumption, you can get a whole range of inequalities. And I would like to give the proof of this theorem for independent variables because it's very simple. And the proofs in dynamical systems will be based really on this idea, on this very same idea. So let me give the proof of the theorem I wrote above. Well, the very simple case we all know very well, it's when we have a sum. So assume first we have a sum. So if k of x1, xn, it's a sum of functions only depending on the ith variable, sum of fi of xi. And of course, since saying that this function is separately bounded by 1, really means that this function fi, each of these fi's are bounded by 1. Then, what you're looking at, this k of x1, xn, it's really a sum of fi of xi, and these are, say yi, they are independent and they are bounded. Independent and bounded. So you see, even if you started with random variables that were identically distributed, when you're asking this kind of concentration question, you right away run into random variables which are not ideal. But here you retain the independence, and that's enough to get an exponential inequality because you have Hoeffding inequality. It's an inequality that tells you if you are adding up bounded independent random variables, then you have an exponential deviation inequality. And it's the proof is very simple. Just do the usual computation with the Laplace transform and optimize with the parameter. So you use the Hoeffding inequality for these random variables, and you get precisely the inequality I was claiming. The above one, or this one, if you're assuming that the Li does depend on I. Of course, it's a sum. It's too easy. The point, well, here you really need the boundedness. Hoeffding is a little bit stronger than, well, it's a kind of Chebyshev for bounded random variables. So this was okay because we have a sum and we precisely know how to handle sums. The point is that the same proof works in the general case. In the general case, we will try to write k as a sum of something and try to use some probabilistic inequality for this something. And what's the decomposition you will get? Let me define some function ki of x1, xn. It will be, you average out the first I random variables. So it's expectation of k of x1, xi minus 1, and then xi, xn. Okay? I define the function like that. And in fact, it does not depend on x1 to xi minus 1. It only depends on the last one. And then I will say that k is simply k0. You do a telescopic sum. It's the sum of ki minus ki plus 1. And what do you have in the end? The last term, it's kn plus 1, say. And k plus 1 is simply you have averaged out all your variables. So what you have in the end is expectation of k. Let me put this expectation of k on the left. K minus expectation of k is simply a sum like this. And the point is that these things, they are bounded by 1 in the uniform case or by Li in the non-uniform case. And the reason is that between Ki and Ki plus 1, the only difference is that you replace this small xi, this deterministic small xi, with your random variable xi. So you just have to change things at this precise coordinate and not changing the other ones. So we know that when we do this, the function k does not change a lot. So this difference is bounded by 1. And if you take ki and average away also the ith variable, then you end up on ki plus 1. This means that this is a fi measurable, where fi is generated by your last variables. It does not depend on the first one. So it's fi measurable, and if you look at the conditional expectation with respect to fi plus 1, it's 0. So this is a martingale, or reverse martingale. So we were not able to decompose K as a sum of things that are independent, but we were able to get a decomposition as a sum of things that are bounded and one-sided independent, in a sense. This is this martingale condition, and Hoeffding inequality, you take the proof, and you check it also works for martingales. It has a different name in this case, it's called Azuma inequality. But it's exactly the same statement and the same proof as Hoeffding, so it applies, this Hoeffding inequality also applies to bounded martingales. And you get exactly the statement you wanted. Okay, so this is the end of the proof. And, well, we didn't use a lot of independence in here. We use martingales, and we know that martingales, for dynamical systems, we have tools to build martingales out of dynamical systems, so maybe this proof can also work for dynamical systems and tell you something interesting. So, what will be the statement? The kind of things we would like to have. You take some dynamical system from x to x, preserving a measure mu, and you take some function k of n variables. And you're asking, does it satisfy the same kind of inequality, but instead of taking x1, x2, and so on, which are independent, we will take iterates of our dynamical system. So the question is k of x Cn minus 1x close to its average? For most x. And you want some kind of precise versions, just like the above. So in the independent case, this was concentration for a measure we had independent, so it was a product measure. We were interested in concentration for a product measure, and here we're interested in the concentration for a measure which is supported on orbits. So concentration for the measure, well, at time 0 you start from mu, and then you put some Dirac mass at the iterate of your point. Well, you see what I mean. Well, you say Dirac mass is too deterministic, you will have nothing, but we know that if your dynamical system is chaotic enough, it gives you a lot of independence, and it's almost as if, say, tky were independent from y. So you're not in a real independent case, but nevertheless you expect that the behavior should be the same. So what kind of theorem can you get? Oh no, just one definition. Just think of the case where k is a sum of functions, or just the Birkhoff sum of one fixed function. For dynamical systems, we know that if your function has no smoothness property, you will not get anything. For bounded functions, you can get arbitrarily bad behavior. Ask Dalibor about this. So if you want to get something nice, having a condition such as separately bounded cannot be enough. So you need a condition that incorporates some regularity inside it. So I will say that K is separately Lipschitz. Well, precisely the same. Just change one of your variables. And the dependence should be Lipschitz in terms of this variable, so you can have some constant Li just as above, and then the distance from xi to x prime I. Those Li are Lipschitz constants, and that's why I call them Li. So once you have this definition, the theorem you can get is that if T is say a subshift of finite type, and mu is a Gibbs measure as usual, or if T is a non-Markov expanding map of the interval, or if T is a, well, you see the idea, if it's chaotic enough, you will get some conclusion, and the conclusion will be you have some concentration. So chaotic enough, say a Young tower with exponential tails. For those who know what this is very well, for those who don't, just think of a very chaotic system that mixes things very nicely. Then it satisfies a concentration inequalities. Of course, you will not get these 2 or these 10. They are universal for our ideas. But in this case, you will have some constants that will depend on your system. What you can say that there exists some constant C, such that, okay, let me get it straight, such that for all integer, the number of variables, I want something that is uniform in the time iterates. For all n in n, for all k, which is separately Lipschitz, and for all t, you look at the measure of the points x such that k along your trajectory differs a lot from its expectation. So by expectation of k, I mean this integral of k along the trajectories. So the measure of point where k is far away from its average, this is smaller than, well, the same. Some constants, this constant c, times exponential minus t squared over c, the sum of the Li squared. Okay? So same statement as in the ID case. Let me give some names. This is due to Collet, Martinez, and Schmidt in 2002. And we get this one with Chazot in 2012. Okay, what is nice is that once you have this, all the above examples you like, the Birkhoff sums. These inequalities, you deduce them for your Birkhoff sums. You know that the tails are uniformly Gaussian and that the large deviation is exponentially unlikely to happen. If you look at the Birkhoff sum of, well, you want k to be separately Lipschitz, so you need to, your function f that you're looking at has to be Lipschitz. You need some smoothness, it's not surprising. Of course, this was already known for all these kind of maps. These kind of maps are very chaotic, they have been studied a lot, so Gaussian behavior of large deviation were already known, and even more precise results are known. But if you're asking questions about these other guys above, U statistics or non-conventional averages or maxima or whatever, or more complicated stuff, then this theorem applies. It applies every time. usually, if you're looking at a specific problem, it will not give you the best estimates. Often, if you have some specific structure in the question you're asking, these specific structures should also come up in the answer to your question. But you can use this at least to start with. It gives you a lot of information. Sorry? Yeah, the proof, well, the proof is the same. The proof is the same. I mean, what you want to do is you take your function k of x t n minus 1x, and you want to decompose it as a sum like this, as a telescoping sum, which is made of martingales. And once you have this, you can apply Azuma, and the whole game is to be able to construct these martingales. But in this kind of very chaotic environment, we have a lot of tools to do this. We have transfer operators, we have nice filtrations. This is precisely the kind of setting where you think that this proof should be generalizable. And it's the case. And I was planning to give the proof, and I won't. Well, I won't because I won't have time, but you can ask me the question. It's not very complicated. And okay. So I claim that this is nice. And the only example up to now I have given is, well, the main example I have given up to now is these Birkhoff sums, for which we already had these results and even stronger results. So maybe it's time to give some kind of indication of the application you can have of this kind of theorems with more complicated functionals than just a Birkhoff sum. Yes, yes. So let me give 2 applications. There are a lot of applications. There is a very nice paper by Chazot, Collet, and Schmidt in 2005, where they give maybe 8 applications of that kind of inequalities for dynamical systems. And I will just pick 2 of them just to illustrate a little bit what one can do. So the first application will be to empirical measures. So think of my Paul analogy at the beginning of the talk. The question I want to ask my system is, how does your invariant measure look like? And a way to answer to this question is to pick x at random. Pick x at random. And then you run your dynamical system long enough. And you know that the orbit will equidistribute towards the invariant measure. So you define the measure mu(n) of x, which is just the average along the orbit. It's one way to approximate your invariant measure, and the question is that a good answer? Is that close? Is mu(n) of x close, and how close with how large a probability? So I need to quantify a little bit by what I mean by how close. I need to put a distance between 2 measures. You have a lot of distance you can put, but a simple one is the Kantorovich distance. The Kantorovich distance between 2 probability measures, nu1 and nu2, on a metric space is simply you look how the average of functions differ for nu1 and for nu2. But you have to put some smoothness of a function. Otherwise, if your measure is singular, you could take some bump function or whatever, and you could get very different averages. So you need to look at some class of nice function. If you're just in a metric space, the more natural class of functions you have is a Lipschitz function. So you just define it as a supremum, the f Lipschitz. And f is bounded by 1, and the Lipschitz constant of f is also bounded by 1. And you look, do nu1 and nu2 see this function f approximately in the same way? Integral of f d nu1 minus integral of f d nu2. And this is a nice distance. And the question you want to ask is, what is the distance between mu(n) of x and your true invariant measure mu. So the question you're looking at, what you want to know, it is what is the probability that the Kantorovich distance between mu n of x and mu is larger than t. What can you say about this? In terms of n and t. And I will not be able to answer this question in full generality, not even in these systems, but let's just see what concentration gives you for this kind of problem. So let me define a function k of x1, xn. It will be the supremum of f as above, Lipschitz, with bounded by 1, Lipschitz constant bounded by 1 of 1 over n sum of f of xi's minus the integral of f d mu. Okay? This is some function. Don't try to compute it. You won't have any closed form for this supremum over the whole space of Lipschitz function. It's very bad. But if you just change one of the xi's, you don't change the function a lot, because you're just changing you're replacing f of xi with f of x prime I. And since your function f is Lipschitz, this is bounded by the distance from xi to x prime I, and you have the 1 over n in front. So this function, you don't know anything about it, but that it's separately Lipschitz. And the Li's are all bounded by 1 over n. So very well, you can apply this concentration inequality. And what it tells you is that the probability, and of course when you're looking at k of x t n minus 1x, by definition, it's precisely this Kantorovich distance between mu n of x and mu. It's a quantity you want to understand. And so the concentration inequality tells you that the probability that the Kantorovich distance between mu n of x and mu minus its average is larger than t. The probability that this is larger than t is small. And the small is very precise. It's exponentially well controlled. And you see, it's not exactly the question I was asking. I was asking what's the probability that this is large? And the concentration tells you it's close to its average. But you don't know what the average is, so you're in trouble. In fact, once you know this, in some situations, not in all situations, but in some situations you can bootstrap it. Because from this, if you know information about some points, if you know information about enough points, then you will know that the average will not be too far away from 0. And optimizing the parameters, you can get some estimate on this. But it will depend on some a priori knowledge on the invariant measure. So this depends on the specific systems you're looking at. No, it's here it can be a Gibbs measure. Here it's Gibbs measure. Here I was thinking absolutely continuous invariant measure, but it also works for the analogs of Gibbs measure, and here also. So we just need some nice dynamically defined measure for which you have say exponential decay of correlations and enough tools to work with it. You have to restrict the class of measures you're looking at. It needs to have good distortion properties and things like that. Okay, so the second application I want to discuss is nice because it seems even more complicated than this one, but then you can get a complete answer to your questions. So the second application is the following. It's to some kind of shadowing. What is shadowing? Say you have some y inside X. So X is a space where you have a dynamical system, and you take some subset Y, which is not too small. Say mu of Y is equal to 1/4. And you're asking, if I take some point in X, is there some point in Y such that the trajectories look the same? So you take X in X, and you're looking for Y in Y, such that, well, the distance from TIX to TIY is small on average. So 1/n sum from 1 to n of this is small. Can you find a point in Y which follows for the most time, which follow the orbit of your given point X in X? And let me define, well, you see how the game works. You just need to define one nice function K, which answers your problem, and then applies a concentration inequality to this. Let me define K of x1, xn. It will be the infimum over all y in Y of the quantity here, 1/n, sum from 1 to n of the distance of xi to tiy. Okay, it's some functions of n variables. Well, ti minus 1 if you want to. Okay. And this is a nice function, because if you just change one of the variables, well, it's only one term of this sum that you're changing, and you're changing it in a Lipschitz way. And you have the infimum, but it's not a problem. It's still, this function is separately Lipschitz, and the Li is smaller than 1/n. It's, well, the same computation as there. And what you would like to know if K of x Tn minus 1x is small, because if it's small, it tells you that there is a point Y in Y for which you have a good approximation. And so the concentration inequality tells you that the probability that K minus expectation of K is larger than T is small. Which would be very good if you knew that the expectation of K were 0, because if it were 0, then it would tell you that K is small for most points, meaning that most points can be well approximated by a point in Y. But here there is a difference between this setting and here. Here you know that K vanishes on Y. Okay, and the concentration tells you that your function is very close to a constant. So this constant cannot be away from 0, because your function is... No. Okay. The measure of points x such that K of x Tn minus 1x minus the expectation of K is small. Sorry. So the probability is a dynamical one. Just pick your point at random at the first step. It's the only randomness you're allowed to have. And then iterate the dynamical system. Yeah, I have. This is the measure of all points in your whole space. And I want to shadow it with a point in my smaller subset Y. Y is a smaller subset, and I want to find a point in this smaller subset with roughly the same orbit. Well, here, if you want to prove that kind of statement, yes, T is Lipschitz continuous, and it's even much better than that. So here, you know that this function K as a function of x Tn minus 1, it's almost constant, but you know it's 0 on a set of non-negligible measure, so this constant has to be small. And in the end, you deduce that K is small on a large set, which is precisely the question you were asking. So this is very nice. And you see, if you try to answer this question with techniques relying on the structure of the problem, you will be in trouble. This set Y can be arbitrarily bad. I'm not saying that Y is a nice open set with Lipschitz boundary. Y can be anything with measure 1/4. And for any set, it's OK. And by the way, for this kind of question, you know that you will not have a nice asymptotic theorem, a central limit theorem or whatever, because your function is 0 on a set of large measures. So if you had some asymptotic distribution, it will give a 0 mass. Well, it would give a big mass, a big atom at 0. So it would be some kind of strange behavior. But for this kind of question, concentration is very efficient. OK, so up to now, I only talked about very uniform situation where everything is exponential. It turned out that you have also statements in less uniform situations. Say if you have maps that mix polynomially fast, intermittent maps of the interval, or the stadium billiard, or things like that, you can get statements with the same flavor. The only difference is that instead of having some exponential deviation inequality, you will get something related to the chaoticity degree of your map. So if it's polynomially mixing, you will get some polynomial estimates depending on the speed of mixing of correlations. So I will not write precise statements. And I would like to end with, maybe I gave you the impression that whenever we control well the statistical properties of the dynamical systems, whenever we control well the Birkhoff sums, then we control well the concentration. Maybe it's the same kind of questions. And so there are two points that you may think through. So maybe that for concentration, maybe the same kind of behavior as for Birkhoff sums. And the second question is that if you know the degree of mixing of your map, if you know, say, that it's exponentially mixing, then maybe you can get concentration. And that's a little bit the ideas I tried to convey up to now in this talk. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, the answer is no to these questions. There is really a difference between concentration inequalities and behavior of Birkhoff sum or mixing or whatever. And I would just like to give 2 examples to show what happens. I'm taking 3 more minutes because I count the questions of Fury as a part of the 10 minutes questions. So, you know that if you want to prove a central limit theorem for Birkhoff sums, it's not important that the system should be mixing. If you have some periodicity in the system, it's not bad. In fact, you can induce limit theorem from one system to a bigger system. So Birkhoff sums are, to control Birkhoff sums, you can induce, and you don't need mixing. What I mean is the following. If you say you have a set A with measure 1/2 and a set B with measure 1/2, and your transformation does the following. Whenever you're in A, you map to B. And whenever you're in B, you map to A. And the map T squared on A, it's mixing very nicely. then you know that on A, for Birkhoff sums, you will have central limit theorem and whatever, and you can deduce it for the whole system. For this kind of system, Birkhoff sums are very nice. And here, concentration fails miserably. Concentration fails. And just look at the following stupid example. You take K of x1, xn. It's the sum of 1a of x2i plus the sum of 1b of x2i plus 1. Okay, I take the number of even times you're in A and the number of odd times you're in B. This is a very nice separately Lipschitz function. The point is that here at odd and even times, I'm not putting the same function. So this is different from the Birkhoff sum where you always put the same function. And here, if you're looking at k of x, Cn minus 1x, it will be n if x is in B, and 0 if x is in A, precisely because I've chosen this function to mimic the periodic behavior of the map. If you're in B, then every time you are adding up 1, A, sorry. If you're in A, every time you are adding up 1. If you're in B, every time you are adding up 0. So this function is very far from being a constant. So here, in this case, you have no concentration. So controlling concentration, more complicated than controlling Birkhoff sums. So here it's no. But then you say, okay, this is cheating. This is because there is no mixing in here. Maybe if you have a nice system with mixing, you can say more. Here, well, let me just say it with words. There are a lot of systems for which we know mixing. Take a time one map of a contact another flow. Since Dolgopiat and Liverani, we know that this mixing is exponentially fast. Or take Toral automorphisms, which are ergodic but have eigenvalues of modulus 1. We know that this is exponentially mixing. You can do the computation in Fourier. For these systems, we don't know the concentration. And the reason is that, well, it's really more complicated. When you want to prove mixing, you start with one function and you iterate it, the same function all over the time. So if you have some Fourier mode, the function you will iterate will always stay in the same Fourier mode, and you can work separately with different modes. For concentration, you want to control any function k, and this function k, depending on the coordinate you're looking at, it can live in different Fourier modes. It's much more nasty than what you could expect. So there are still a lot of open questions in this direction. An interesting one, because as I tried to explain, once you know this, you have a lot of interesting dynamical applications. Okay, thank you.
Are there any questions or comments, remembering that you have to use the microphone?
Have kind of vague question. Do you know an interesting example when you cannot get it for such inequalities for by large deviations for sums? I'm talking only when k is a sum, but you have concentration inequality. Apart from the fact that proof of concentration inequality is always simpler.
You mean? No, when you can prove concentration, you use the same kind of tools as to prove exponential inequalities, exponential deviation inequalities for Birkhoff sums, but in a more complicated way. So if you give me a system and you tell me I do not know how to prove large deviations, essentially there is no hope you will be able to prove concentration inequalities. But for, say, for another flow, we know the large deviation inequalities, but we don't know the concentration.
Are there any more questions?
Thank you. Yes, about the constant here in the theorem.
Yeah, the C. What
Yeah.
does it depend on? I guess it depends on T, but does it also depend on mu? And do
Yes.
you have some control on this?
You can have a control on it, but even if you're asking the speed of decay of correlations, in the speed of decay of correlations, the speed of mixing of your system, you have some constants. And these constants are rather complicated and boring to control. I mean, if you give me a specific system with the formulas, I can come up with some estimate for the constant. And the estimate will not be very good, but I can produce them. And essentially, the same constant will work here. It's the same constant as for the decay of correlations. Say.
Are there any more questions?
Is there an example of concentration in a situation where you don't have a spectral gap?
As I said, this kind of exponential concentration inequalities are very strong, and you do not expect them if you don't have a spectral gap. But there are weaker concentration inequalities, polynomial concentration inequalities, which work for intermittent interval maps, where you don't have a spectral gap. But this concentration inequality will be much weaker. They will be polynomial, and
But it's a kind of, you mean a sort of non-exponential Young tower?
yes.
So there is a sort of spectral gap there. Yeah, I mean, you induce and you get.
Okay. Okay, in this sense, in most chaotic systems, you have a spectral gap hidden somewhere.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe we can wind up the questions and move on to the next talk in maybe 3 minutes, and thank the speaker again.